Okay, so here we are. It's the spring of 2020. We are on COVID-19 spring break, I suppose. Today, what I want to show you is how to construct a slab container. But before we do that, we're going to start with a maquette made from Bristol board that we will ultimately use as a template for our slabs, so that when we cut everything out, all the slabs will fit together the way that they're designed to. So the materials that we need for this will be our Bristol board, an X-Acto knife, your masking tape, a ruler, and a pencil. And then obviously a little bit of imagination. Okay, so what we have here are some different maquettes that are constructed out of a couple different materials. This maquette is constructed out of a very thin Luan. It's wood. I wouldn't expect you to use that, although you could. And it's nice to have them in this format so that they can be used over and over and over. It's very durable as opposed to Bristol board, which will last for a number of uses, but it starts to deteriorate much more rapidly than something like this. Here's another one that's constructed out of a little thicker poster board, illustration board perhaps, and then here's another variation on that same material, different form obviously, but the one thing that's common to all of them is that they're fairly geometric in their nature, right? And hard slab construction lends itself really nicely to geometric forms, so that's the direction that I would encourage you guys to go. You can do curved forms, but for our first time through, I think it's best to stick with forms that have flat planes and sharp edges. Okay, all right, so having said that, now you need to come up with a simple basic form that you can construct out of your Bristol board. Once you've done that, then you know that you have all the parts that you need for your slabs. Okay, are you with me? Okay, so it's good to start with some ideas. I've been considering doing something that's a little more low profile, maybe like a jewelry box or keepsake box of some sort. So not too big, kind of small, petite, simple lines, something maybe like that, right? So I want to start with just a sketch, put your ideas on paper so you have a better idea of where you're going, right? Once you have that, then you can start to think in terms of how large you want it. From that point, you can start measuring stuff out, drawing, and then cutting and taping things together. Okay, so here I've drawn out all the parts for my maquette. I have my sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, and again, I'm working from this sketch, so something like that. It's 4 inches tall, 7 inches wide at the top, 6 inches wide at the bottom, so it's a little bit tapered. I've got all 4 sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then here you can see I have my top and my bottom. So now what I need to do is cut it out and tape it together. And the idea is that if all of these parts fit together, when I move on to the clay component of this particular project, I'm going to know that all of my slabs are going to be cut to fit. They're going to fit together, but I also have the opportunity to work out any design flaws that I see in the maquette before I get to the clay, which is also really beneficial in that when we're working with clay, as you guys know, we have a limited amount of time. We've got moisture loss. That's going to be a real big problem for us if we're still working out the design issues once we've rolled out the slabs. So here we have an opportunity to tweak things before we even get clay out of the bag. So now it's just a matter of cutting it out and putting it together. I can cut it with an X-Acto knife, or if your material is thin enough, like this Bristol board, you could actually use a pair of scissors. So whatever works best for you. I prefer to use an X-Acto knife and a metal ruler so that I can get really sharp, clean edges. So now we can see, in essence, what the parts of our container are going to look like. Now it's a matter of taping it together. So here I've taped together the majority of the parts. And now it's a matter of just kind of folding it up and taping it together further so that I have a fully constructed volumetric form. So here I'm just putting the last panel on. You can see that I have all my parts. I'm using a little Scotch tape. It's a little stickier than my masking tape there. And I just want to make sure that everything fits together fairly well. And that will set me on my way when it comes to working with my slabs. All right. Many of you may be wondering about feet or a lid or handle, things like that. We'll work all of that stuff out when we get to the clay component of this particular project. For now, what we want to do is, if we're satisfied with the overall form, we want to take that form and then decorate the outside. We're going to spend some time working out the decorative aspects of the container before we even get to the clay. Being that we have the downtime to do so, we're going to utilize that time and develop patterns on the exterior. And you can do that simply with pencils, colored pencils, crayons, markers. Whatever you have laying around the house can be used to decorate the surface. Now, I wouldn't try to do that when it's in its constructed form. Once you're satisfied with the container itself, you can break it down into the individual parts. Like so. And that way you have a flat surface to work with, and you can draw your patterns on there much more easily, and then put it back together. Okay, so the next step in decorating the exterior of the boxes is to explore patterns. And forming a pattern can be done very easily if we start off with a grid like you see here. Once you have a grid, then you can start to plot different elements on specific points on your grid, and you can form a variety of patterns. In terms of what I want you guys to explore, I would like you to explore a different pattern for each side of the box. Ultimately, we will choose one pattern and decorate the entire box with that one pattern. Creating the grid is fairly easily done if you have a ruler and perhaps a square or a triangle. And what I've done is I've created a grid that is 1 inch by 1 inch. You can create a grid using any increments that you want. A 1 inch grid seemed to work okay for the size of the box that I'm working with. I used that on all 4 of my panels, as you can see. So once I measured off across 1 inch, I measured up 1 inch, and then I used my square to then draw that grid. And then I can lay out my patterns very easily based on that grid so that I have a nice sense of repetition over and over across each panel. Okay, so here's my maquette. I've reconstructed it after applying my experimental patterns to the different panels, one of which I will choose and use over the whole thing, or maybe I'll use all of them. I kind of like the way it looks with all these different patterns, but that's something that we can discuss and decide upon once we get the object constructed from clay.